Donald Trump has a problem. I think that's an understatement. Donald Trump has a lot of problems, but one of the problems that Donald Trump has is his foundation, the Donald Trump Foundation. And we'll get into trust me, we're going to get into the nuances and the differences and the arguments. But Trump has, let me pull up something here. Trump has a potential. Trump is facing a potential federal investigation about his contribution to Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi's campaign in the sum total of $25,000. He has two problems with that contribution. One, the contribution was made from his foundation and not from him personally. The foundation is, of course, a nonprofit. Being a nonprofit, you cannot contribute to a foundation. And Trump has since reimbursed the foundation the $25,000 and paid a $2,500 fine to the IRS as a penalty for making a contribution from a nonprofit to a political campaign. So the first wave of his problems has been taken care of. Right. So the IRS portion has been resolved. It's been paid and he's been fined and it's over. The second part of what he's facing is based on the appearance of quid pro quo, that in the middle of Donald Trump's in the middle of the Florida Attorney General's investigation of Trump University, she suddenly dropped the investigation into Trump University shortly after receiving this contribution. The reports, I believe, from three major papers, the Miami Herald, the Orlando Sentinel, and the Tampa Bay Times, all indicate that Bondi went and sought this contribution from Donald Trump. Donald Trump acquiesced, gave her a contribution, and shortly after that, her office stopped looking into the fraud charges, the allegations of fraud. In terms of Trump University, there are people who paid, I believe the highest I saw was about $47,000. Somebody paid $8,000. There's a couple of hundred Florida citizens who have been taken, who felt as though they have been taken advantage by Trump University. They all appealed to the state Attorney General, and the Attorney General, a Republican, Pam Bondi, opened an investigation. And then shortly after receiving this $25,000 contribution, the investigation ended. This gives a very apparent look of quid pro quo, of bribery, of political bribery. And there have been multiple requests of the Justice Department to investigate this and to press criminal charges against Pam Bondi and Donald Trump. This is not a little thing. This is actually a really big thing that that Trump is going to have to face over the next 57 days that are left. This will potentially lead to a full-blown investigation into Trump, his relationship with Pam Bondi, Pam Bondi's investigation of Trump University, which ultimately is going to lead to more of an investigation into Trump University. In addition to all of the lawsuits, there's a class action lawsuit outside of from New York that is pending relating to Trump University. So this is not an October surprise, because we're not in October yet, and not an October surprise because this is something that has been investigated for a long time. However, it is just now getting to the point of a federal investigation because, as the Orlando Sentinel put it, the Florida authorities have no desire whatsoever to investigate this. In fact, it would be the Attorney General's office who would investigate something like this. And seeing as this implicates the Attorney General, there's no way she's going to investigate herself and find herself guilty. So, and I believe this was from the Miami Herald, that stated that at this point, it's something that the people of Florida have to appeal to the federal government to get some type of remedy to this fraud. Now, here's a layer of complication. This falls into the category of whether or not you can prove quid pro quo. And it falls into the category of the decision that was just made by the Supreme Court in McDonald versus the Supreme Court. Former Governor Bob McDonnell, who was convicted of political corruption and bribery. And that ruling, that conviction was overturned unanimously by the Supreme Court because they felt as though the standard for this conviction was not met because they were not able to prove quid pro quo. And because now there are some differences, but this will be brought up, guaranteed. This is going to be brought up in this investigation of Donald Trump. In the case of McDonald, they felt that if they kept this conviction, then it would have ramifications that spill over into the normal activities of politicians, scheduling meetings, and whether or not scheduling a meeting with someone constitutes a political favor. And does that political favor mean does that meeting mean that the meeting would not have happened if not for that contribution? So the McDonald case is in a way it's complicated, but you can read that separately. But in the case of Donald Trump and Pam Bondi, it's going to apply. Now, in the case of Hillary Clinton's foundation and the State Department, it's also going to be applicable. In the case of Hillary Clinton and the State Department and the Clinton Foundation, everyone has put this standard up saying, well, this is something that we should not even be talking about because you can't prove quid pro quo. You cannot prove that Hillary Clinton exchanged these favors because of the money. They're going to run. Now, in the case of Donald Trump, it seems so much more apparent because of, one, how Pam Bondi solicited the donation herself, and then two, the investigation that was ongoing suddenly stopped. So it may very well be that they can prove, or they have enough to assert that this was quid pro quo, essentially a political bribe. They may have enough. And this is why it's a big deal, because now Donald Trump, he's on his way to a potential investigation. And from some insights, well, I don't want to say inside sources, but from people who are connected, they are actually now going to shift this from being a conversation about pay for play to being a conversation of just straight bribery. So, putting Donald Trump aside, the question is this standard of whether or not we should even talk about it because we can't prove quid pro quo is another example of something we will apply to people we like, but will not apply to someone we don't like. Because essentially you can never, unless they hand you an envelope that says bribe, and on it says so that you can stop my investigating me. Pretty much like the case with Li Fong from The Intercept. They were doing an investigation of a Chinese corporation that had money pouring into the U.S. election, right? In that case, the man literally passed an envelope with $200,000 in it so that they could be friends and so that this story could go away. Unless we have, and this is almost the standard the Supreme Court is requiring now with the case with McDonald versus the United States. Without that type of just outright blatant bribery, it's impossible. It's impossible to prove. And as people apply that to Hillary Clinton and the Clinton Foundation, you also have to apply that to Donald Trump and the Trump Foundation, because they're not apples to apples. Granted, I would give you that, because there's enough in the Donald Trump case that it may warrant a federal investigation just standing on its own, right? But whether or not you can discuss it in the media, or whether or not you should discuss it in the media, or whether or not there's enough evidence to actually prove, no, there's not enough evidence to actually prove that this was a bribe. They're going to have to conclude that this was a bribe. But it's just another example. I mean, this is where we have come, and I don't know if this is where we've come, but this is where we've been. We've been here for a while, where we will apply something to someone else and we will not apply it to our own standards. We will give ourselves the way out and not afford that way out to someone else. Because if we're going to discuss now, if we're discussing, and it's like what, the chicken or the egg. Now, are we discussing the Trump Foundation because people scratched the surface of the Clinton Foundation too much, and then everybody was like, well, let's have a look at Donald Trump. And then they found all of this festering in Donald Trump's foundation. The bottom line is, there's a problem with how we allow money in our campaigns across the nation. And there's a problem when people have foundations that can accept these obscene amounts of dollars, and then we shouldn't have no hint or any suspicion in our mind that they could possibly be granting a favor because we can't prove it. I mean, who else is given that much benefit of the doubt in their life? I mean, seriously, think about it. Who else has been given that much benefit of the doubt? You know, on your job, you would never be given that much benefit of the doubt. In your relationship, you will never be given that level of benefit of the doubt. But we grant and afford politicians that much leeway, which clearly has been abused. I mean, I guess it was like that Louisiana politician, his dumbass put $90,000 in a freezer, right? And you know, just $90,000 and didn't even really, you know, I guess we're waiting on people to make big mistakes like that, clear and obvious mistakes like that, before we say, oh, hey, that was a bribe. Meanwhile, we have Donald Trump giving Pam Bondi $25,000, and all of a sudden his investigation goes away. But because of how it was done, and because it was done as a campaign contribution, then it's very questionable whether or not we can assert quid pro quo or a bribe. Same with Hillary Clinton. The Clinton Foundation receives millions upon millions of dollars, right? And then all of a sudden there are meetings, there are emails, there are favors. I mean, you had Raj Fernando, a guy with zero international nuclear proliferation skills, landing on a top secret, top level clearance nuclear committee. And all he did was give contributions to the Clinton Foundation. And we're all supposed to simply say, because we did not or cannot prove that this was a direct bribe, that this is something we shouldn't talk about. No.
That's not how it works. That's not how any of this works.